Liam Carter, a 35-year-old mechanic, spent most of his days working tirelessly at Mason's Auto and Repair, a modest garage on the outskirts of a quiet town. His life had never been particularly easy, but he had found solace and purpose in his craft. To Liam, fixing cars wasn't just about repairing metal and engines, it was about making people's lives a little better, even if just for a moment. Whether it was offering a small discount to a struggling customer or staying late to help someone in need, he believed that kindness, no matter how small, could make a difference. Despite the grease-stained hands and the long hours, Liam never complained. He had learned to find joy in the simple things, the rhythmic clang of tools, the hum of an engine roaring back to life, and the gratitude in a customer's eyes when he solved a problem they thought was beyond repair. His garage wasn't just a workplace, it was a place where people came not only to fix their cars but sometimes to find a little hope. What Liam didn't know, however, was that one act of kindness, one simple decision to help, would set off a chain of events that would change his life in ways he never imagined. As the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the small town in a soft glow, Mason's Auto and Repair buzzed with the familiar sounds of metal clinking, engines humming, and the occasional hiss of steam. The scent of motor oil and grease lingered in the air, wrapping around Liam Carter like an old, familiar coat. He stood beneath the bright overhead lights, sleeves rolled up, hands streaked with oil as he tightened a stubborn bolt beneath the hood of an aging sedan. It had been a long day, like most of them were, but Liam didn't mind. Fixing things gave him a sense of purpose, something to keep his mind busy, something tangible to set right in a world that often felt unpredictable. He exhaled, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, when a sudden, hesitant knock echoed from the garage door. Liam frowned slightly, glancing toward the entrance. It was late for customers, and most of the regulars knew he was usually winding down by this hour. He tossed his wrench onto the workbench and wiped his hands on a grease-streaked rag before walking toward the door. As he stepped into view, his eyes landed on an unexpected sight. A young boy, no older than 9, sat in a worn-out wheelchair just outside the garage. His small frame was partially covered by a faded blanket, and his thin fingers clutched the armrests, which were barely held together with layers of peeling duct tape. One of the wheels wobbled precariously, as if it might fall off at any moment, and the metal frame was dented and scratched from years of wear. Beside him stood a woman, likely his mother. She looked to be in her mid-30s, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. There was exhaustion in her posture, the kind that came from years of struggle, yet her eyes still held warmth and quiet determination. She nudged the wheelchair forward slightly, her hesitation evident in the way she hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice careful, as if unsure whether she should even be asking. "Are you Liam Carter?" Liam wiped his hands one more time before stepping closer. His expression remained neutral, though his gaze flickered between the woman and the boy, quickly assessing the situation. "That's me," he said, his voice steady but kind. "How can I help?" The boy hesitated, shifting slightly in his seat, his small fingers tightening around the worn-out armrest. His eyes, dark and unsure, met Liam's for only a moment before darting away again. He looked as though he wasn't used to asking for help, like he expected to be turned away. His mother cleared her throat, sensing her son's reluctance, and spoke for him. "My son, Daniel, his wheelchair has been giving us trouble," she explained, her voice laced with a quiet desperation she tried to suppress. "I've taken it to a few places, but no one seems able to fix it. Someone in town mentioned that you're good with anything that has wheels." Liam's chest tightened as he looked down at the broken wheelchair again. This wasn't just a machine in need of repair, it was a child's independence, a child's freedom. He could see how much Daniel relied on it, how much he needed it to be sturdy, reliable. He crouched down to the boy's level, offering a small, reassuring smile. He knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of kindness, and he also knew what it was like to go without it. "Well," Liam said, his voice warm yet confident, "they weren't wrong. Mind if I take a look?" Daniel hesitated, his small hands gripping the edges of his chair, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, cautious hope. He nodded. Without hesitation, Liam reached for the wheelchair's handles and wheeled it into the garage. As he pushed it under the bright work lights, he could already feel the weight of the task ahead. This was more than just fixing a broken object, this was about restoring something far more important. And Liam knew, deep in his gut, that he wasn't going to let this boy down. Liam carefully rolled the wheelchair into the garage, positioning it directly beneath the bright overhead lights. The metal frame creaked slightly as he maneuvered it, and he could hear the faint rattle of loose components inside. Crouching down, he ran his calloused fingers along the worn-out frame, his trained eyes immediately noticing every flaw, scratches, dents, and the unmistakable signs of years of heavy use. His brow furrowed as he examined the damaged wheel bearings, the bent frame, and the barely functional brakes. The armrest, which was pitifully held together with duct tape, looked like it could snap at any moment. This wasn't just a minor fix, this wheelchair had been through a lot, and it needed serious work. As Liam continued his inspection, he stole a glance at Daniel and his mother, who stood a few steps away, watching him with quiet anticipation. He could see the tension in the woman's posture, the way she clutched the strap of her worn-out purse and bit her lower lip nervously. She was clearly worried, perhaps expecting him to say the repairs were too complicated or too expensive. Meanwhile, Daniel sat motionless in his seat, his small hands gripping the sides of his chair as if bracing himself for disappointment. His wide brown eyes held a mixture of hope and uncertainty, as if he had been let down too many times before. Liam took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as he straightened up and wiped his hands on his grease-streaked rag. He offered them a reassuring smile, but his voice remained honest. "This isn't just a quick patch-up job," he admitted, his tone gentle but firm. "It's gonna take some work, but I think I can fix it." The mother let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging slightly in relief. She placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder and nodded. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, she hesitated before adding, I don't know how much something like this will cost, but..." Liam barely let her finish before shaking his head. He could already sense the worry in her voice, the hesitation of someone who had likely struggled with expenses before. He wasn't about to let money stand in the way of helping a kid in need. "Don't worry about that," he said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "I'll take care of it." Her eyes widened in surprise. "But..." "No buts," Liam said with a small chuckle, already reaching for his tools. "Daniel needs his wheels, and I've got the tools and the time. That's all that matters." A long silence followed. The woman blinked rapidly, as if trying to hold back tears. It was clear she wasn't used to this kind of kindness, at least, not without strings attached. Daniel, on the other hand, simply stared at Liam, his expression shifting from cautious hope to something brighter, something closer to awe. Liam, however, had already turned his focus back to the wheelchair, rolling up his sleeves and getting to work. The rhythmic clinking of tools filled the garage, the familiar sound of metal against metal as he tightened screws, adjusted joints, and carefully realigned the frame. Every so often, he would glance over at Daniel and his mother, who remained standing nearby, watching his every move. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Liam decided to break it. "So, kid," he said casually as he worked, "got any favorite hobbies?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then answered shyly, "I like comic books. And drawing." Liam grinned, his hands still busy tightening a loose bolt. "Comic books, huh? That's pretty cool. Got a favorite superhero?" For the first time that evening, Daniel's face lit up with excitement. "Spider-Man," he said quickly, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "He's the best." Liam chuckled. "Ah, a solid choice. A hero who never gives up, huh?" Daniel nodded eagerly, and as if a switch had been flipped, he started talking more. He told Liam about his favorite stories, the heroes he admired, and how he loved to draw them in his sketchbook. His words came faster now, his earlier shyness melting away as he became more animated. Liam listened with genuine interest, occasionally nodding as he worked. He knew what it was like to find escape in something, whether it was in comic books, fixing cars, or simply losing himself in a task that made the world feel a little less heavy. Hours passed as Liam meticulously repaired the wheelchair, straightening out the bent frame, replacing the worn-out bearings with spares he had lying around, and reinforcing the armrests so they would be sturdy enough to last. He even polished the metal, buffing out the scratches so that it gleamed under the garage lights. Finally, he stepped back, wiping the sweat from his forehead and inspecting his work with satisfaction. The wheelchair looked almost brand new. "All done," he announced, wheeling it toward Daniel. The boy's mouth fell open slightly as he reached out, running his small hands over the smooth, polished frame. His fingers traced the newly reinforced armrests, his expression one of complete disbelief. "It looks amazing," he gasped, his voice filled with pure, unfiltered joy. Liam nodded toward the chair. "Give it a spin." Daniel hesitated for only a moment before maneuvering himself into the seat. He pushed forward, then backward, testing the wheels. Then, with a newfound confidence, he spun in a small circle, a delighted giggle escaping him as he moved with ease. "It's perfect," he beamed, his smile stretching from ear to ear. His mother placed a hand over her mouth, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She turned to Liam, shaking her head in disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you," she whispered. Liam simply waved her off with a warm smile. "You don't owe me anything," he said. Seeing that smile is more than enough. As the mother and son left the garage, Daniel waving enthusiastically from his newly restored wheelchair, Liam felt a deep sense of fulfillment settle in his chest. He hadn't just fixed a wheelchair. He had given a boy his freedom back. And though he didn't know it yet, that small act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. Weeks passed since Liam had repaired Daniel's wheelchair, and life at Mason's Auto and Repair continued on its usual rhythm. The sounds of tools clanging, engines starting, and the steady hum of the garage filled the air. Liam, lost in his work, found solace in his daily routine. He had always taken pride in his craft, whether it was fixing a car, mending a bicycle, or even repairing something as simple as a wheelchair. Every job, no matter how small, gave him a sense of fulfillment. But even though the memory of Daniel and his mother lingered in his mind, Liam didn't expect anything more from it. He had helped because he thought it was the right thing to do, not because he sought any recognition. The thought of Daniel's smile and the relief in his mother's eyes was enough for him to feel satisfied. Then, one Saturday morning, everything changed. The familiar hum of the garage, the smell of oil and rubber, and the rhythmic clink of tools were suddenly interrupted by a sound that didn't belong, a deep rumble that grew louder and louder. Liam paused, wrench in hand, and looked around. At first, he thought it was just another plane passing by, but this sound was different. It wasn't the typical noise from the small airport near the outskirts of town. This sound was louder, more distinct, and it didn't fade away. Liam's curiosity piqued. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag and squinting against the bright morning sun. He froze when he saw it, a private jet, gleaming under the sun as it descended from the sky, its engines roaring. It was so out of place in the quiet town that Liam couldn't help but question if he was dreaming. The jet seemed to hover in the air for a moment before it gently landed on a stretch of unused road just outside his garage. The roar of the engines drowned out everything else, leaving Liam standing there, motionless. He wasn't the only one who had stopped in their tracks. Neighbors and customers had gathered, their faces a mix of awe and confusion. Who in their right mind would land a private jet in the middle of nowhere? What was happening? Liam's mind raced, and he was still trying to process what was going on when the jet's door opened with a smooth, almost practiced ease. As the crowd watched in stunned silence, a man in a sharp, tailored suit stepped out of the jet, his polished shoes clicking on the tarmac. He exuded an air of confidence that seemed to contrast sharply with the dusty surroundings of Liam's modest garage. Then, behind the man, came someone Liam recognized, Daniel. The young boy was navigating down the steps of the jet in the very wheelchair Liam had repaired for him weeks ago. Daniel's face was lit up with a broad, excited grin, and he waved enthusiastically at Liam as if they were the best of friends. Behind him stood his mother, her expression a mixture of nervousness and excitement, as though she couldn't quite believe what was happening either. "Liam Carter." The man's voice rang out, breaking the silence. "I believe you've already met my nephew, Daniel." His words carried a weight of familiarity, yet Liam was still caught off guard. He took a step forward, trying to process what was happening. "That's me," he said cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. "But, what is this all about?" The well-dressed man, whose presence seemed to fill the space, smiled warmly and extended his hand. "I'm Richard Ellington, CEO of Ellington Industries," he said confidently. "I wanted to personally thank you for what you did for Daniel. I hear you fixed his wheelchair." Liam, still overwhelmed, nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. "I did, but I don't understand." "Why are you here?" he stammered, his voice betraying his confusion. Richard's smile didn't falter. "You're probably wondering why a private jet landed outside your garage," he said with a light chuckle, as though he understood Liam's bewilderment. "The short answer is you. My sister told me about your kindness, how you repaired Daniel's wheelchair, for free. I wanted to come here personally and thank you." Liam, uncomfortable under the gaze of the gathered crowd, shifted his weight and scratched the back of his neck. "It wasn't a big deal," he said modestly, though he felt a swell of pride at hearing Richard's words. "Daniel just needed a wheelchair. I had the tools. Anyone would have done the same." Richard shook his head gently, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Not everyone would have done what you did, Liam. You didn't just repair a wheelchair. You gave Daniel something far more valuable, his independence. You made him happier than I've seen him in years." Daniel's mother, her eyes moist with gratitude, stepped forward and placed a hand on Liam's arm. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can't thank you enough. You didn't just fix a wheelchair. You gave my son his freedom back." Liam, deeply touched by her words, felt his heart swell with a mixture of humility and pride. But before he could respond, Richard motioned toward the jet. "We didn't just come to thank you," he said with a knowing smile. "We have something for you." Two men emerged from the jet, carrying a large wrapped object. They placed it in front of Liam and carefully pulled the covering away. Liam's jaw dropped when he saw what was underneath, a gleaming, brand-new toolbox, filled with high-end tools. It was the kind of equipment he had always dreamed of owning, but could never afford. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the toolbox, a mixture of disbelief and excitement filling him. Richard watched him closely, a warm smile on his face. "This is for you," he said. "A gift from our family to yours. We know how hard you work, and we want you to have the best tools to continue doing what you love." Liam's mind was racing. He had never expected anything like this. I don't know what to say," he stammered, overwhelmed by the generosity. "This is incredible." But Richard wasn't done. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a neatly folded document, handing it to Liam. "There's one more thing," he said. "Ellington Industries is setting up a community grant, and you're the first recipient." Liam's heart skipped a beat as he read the document, his hands shaking. "This is, for me," he whispered, almost in disbelief. Richard nodded. "It's funding for your garage, new equipment, a fresh coat of paint, and maybe even the opportunity to hire a few extra hands. You've earned it, Liam." Liam, his emotions swirling, struggled to find the words. "But, why? Why would you do all this for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, his tone warm and sincere. "Because people like you deserve to be recognized. You didn't just fix a wheelchair. You reminded us all that the world is a better place when we look out for each other." Daniel, his face glowing with excitement, chimed in with a grin, "And because you're the best mechanic ever." The crowd that had gathered around them broke into applause, and Liam, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support and appreciation, felt a warmth fill his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, not just as a mechanic, but as someone who had made a real difference in the world. As the jet took off and the crowd began to disperse, Liam stood quietly in his garage, the new toolbox gleaming beside him. He thought about the unexpected turn his life had taken, a simple act of kindness that had led to this moment. It wasn't about the recognition or the reward. It was about doing the right thing when no one was watching. And now, Liam realized, his life had changed in ways he could have never imagined. As the private jet soared high into the sky, leaving behind the small town and the gathered crowd, the garage was once again engulfed in a profound silence. The murmurs of the onlookers gradually faded, and the familiar hum of the tools and engines returned to their rightful place in the background. But for Liam, everything had changed. He stood in the middle of his modest garage, his hands still resting on the shiny new toolbox that had been gifted to him, the weight of the moment sinking in. For a man who had always found fulfillment in quiet, solitary work, this unexpected turn of events felt almost like a dream. It was too much for his mind to fully comprehend. How had this all unfolded? Just hours ago, he was working on the daily grind of fixing cars, barely expecting any recognition for his labor. And now, here he stood, the recipient of a gift that he could only dream of, a toolbox full of high-end tools, and a promise of a grant to expand his shop. Liam couldn't help but glance at the gleaming toolbox in front of him, his fingers gently tracing its surface, still in disbelief that such a lavish gift was now his. A toolbox like this was something he had only seen in catalogs and admired from afar, never imagining that he, the humble mechanic in a small town, could one day own it. But as he stood there, feeling the cool steel under his fingertips, a mix of emotions flooded his chest. There was gratitude, certainly, but also a quiet embarrassment. He hadn't done anything to deserve such an extravagant gesture. He had simply repaired a wheelchair for a boy in need. To him, that was just the right thing to do, not something that warranted a grand display of thanks. Yet, as he replayed the words of Richard, the CEO, he couldn't deny the significance of it all. It wasn't about the wheelchair. It was about the kindness, the way people remembered the small gestures that made a real difference in their lives. The moment that Richard had walked up to him, introducing himself as Daniel's uncle, was still vivid in Liam's memory. The shock of seeing Daniel, beaming with pride in the very wheelchair that Liam had repaired, only added to the surreal nature of the situation. And then, the unexpected words, *, we want to thank you. *, the gratitude in Daniel's mother's eyes, the way she spoke about how much that act had meant to her son, it all resonated deeply with Liam. His small repair had given Daniel his freedom back, something he had never realized was so vital until that very moment. It wasn't just about the physical act of fixing a wheelchair, it was about restoring dignity, independence, and hope. But now, the reality was that Liam had been thrust into the center of attention. The jet, the gift, the promise of a community grant, none of it felt real. He wasn't the kind of man who craved fame or accolades, but as he watched the jet disappear, he realized that something inside him had shifted. It wasn't about the recognition, it was about the recognition of the worth of his work. For years, he had labored quietly, with only the satisfaction of a job well done to keep him going. But now, for the first time, he understood that his skills, his willingness to help, had made a profound difference in the world around him. As the day wore on and the crowd gradually dispersed, Liam was left alone in the garage, the stillness around him offering a rare moment of clarity. The toolbox gleamed brightly in the soft light of the fading afternoon, and Liam couldn't help but think about what it represented. It wasn't just a set of tools, it was a symbol of trust, of gratitude, and of a community that now saw him in a new light. He thought about the future, about expanding his business and the opportunity to hire more hands, perhaps even teach others the craft he had perfected over the years. For the first time in his life, he felt as if he had more than just a job. He had a purpose, a renewed sense of calling. He didn't know how things would unfold in the coming days, but Liam finally understood the real value of his work. It wasn't about money or recognition, it was about the lives he touched, even in small ways. As he looked around his garage, the tools neatly organized and the promise of something bigger on the horizon, he smiled. In the quiet solitude of his shop, Liam realized that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. And for the first time in years, he He felt truly seen, not just as a mechanic, but as someone who had made a difference.